Hi folks, welcome to the A Minute to Midnight Show. This is Tony coming to you from New Zealand, and with me on the show I have Alex Newman, who I'm sure for most of you that follow A Minute to Midnight and other places will have no need to explain who Alex is, but if you want to quickly give people an update on things, Alex, and then we'll just shoot into where we're going to go with this very interesting topics today.
Well, thank you for having me on, Tony. It's always a pleasure. Really appreciate what you do. And yeah, the update, I mean, the CBDCs are coming at us fast and furious. They're being implemented in so many nations, I can't even keep track anymore. You know, you just go to any news thing and you'll see country after country now jumping on the CBDC bandwagon. They're coming out of the closet now. You've got prime ministers now announcing to their people that this is going to be implemented and you can't be afraid of it. You're going to have to get used to it. So they're moving very rapidly on that front. Big things, of course, happening to the U.S. economy as well. I just did a big cover story on BlackRock for the New American Magazine. I've got just did another recent big article for the Epoch Times on how the dollar is on the verge of losing its status as the global reserve currency. And I've got another one coming out here very soon on how there are federal, state, and even private sector efforts, some of them pretty frantic, to try to get some sort of gold or alternative system in place for people to be able to conduct commerce in before the music stops and everybody's got to find a chair. So we're definitely in a bizarre situation. You've got the World Economic Forum and all the rest of them preparing for the next pandemic, and that should make us all very concerned. And yeah, it's moving quick, as you know.
It certainly is. So I suppose you mentioned BlackRock. So just very quickly, the New Zealand government announced, I think, $2 billion investment from BlackRock into like environmental infrastructure and so on here, which of course many people are going, oh no, BlackRock, but our government here is, well, I'd have no confidence in them at all in New Zealand, but yeah, so BlackRock is certainly not somebody I would want investing in this country or anywhere else for that matter.
No, but BlackRock is just a diabolical organization in the truest sense of the term. It is run by a man who is just unbelievably depraved. He's involved in all of the nefarious operations, organizations, schemes, and a lot of people have been wondering, why is it that all these very well-established American brands, and it's happened to other companies across the West, are basically committing suicide, right? We saw that recently with Bud Light. Right? Why would they do that? Why would they alienate all their customers to have a guy pretending to be a girl as their kind of spokesman? It's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. Why would Target, a big American retail chain, why would they be marketing bathing suits that are tuck friendly so men can pretend? Why would they be marketing LGBT pride stuff to children? Why would Disney be promoting and producing these terrible, nasty, demonic films? I mean, they've lost $1 billion on their last 10 movies, and yet they keep pumping out the trash, even though they know nobody wants to watch it. What's going on here? Well, BlackRock is what's going on here. And, Larry Fink, the guy who started it and runs it, he's on the board of the World Economic Forum. That should tell you quite a lot right there. He's on the board of directors for the Council on Foreign Relations, which is kind of the U.S.-based sister organization of the Royal Institute for International Affairs in the United Kingdom. I call it deep state headquarters here in the United States. And they're basically taking our money and weaponizing it against us, right? Larry Fink and BlackRock have $10 trillion under management. It's not their money, right? Most of it's our money, either in our retirement accounts or public pensions or state or local government funds, insurance companies. I mean, this is really our money that they're using. And then they're weaponizing that money. They're voting our shares by proxy as if they were us, and forcing these companies to do this kind of stuff, forcing energy companies to add a bunch of climate wackadoodles to their board so that then the Chinese can come in and scoop up these oil fields, these energy development opportunities that otherwise American companies would have picked up. It's very, very nefarious. I encourage people to read the article. And, if BlackRock was investing in my country and I were a New Zealander, I would be very, very concerned. In fact, I'm very concerned about what they're doing all over the world. And, they do all this virtue signaling, ESG, we love the environment, we love human rights. Absolute baloney. If you want to know what they really think about ESG, look at all the money they're funneling to the Communist Party of China, the most murderous organization in human history, one of the worst environmental track records of any entity that we've ever seen on this planet, and yet no problem funneling billions of dollars in American capital to their company, even to their military companies that are producing, products and services that can and will be used by the People's Liberation Army. This is a regime that has killed 100 million innocent people, not including the hundreds of millions of innocent babies. Don't pretend like you care about human rights and the environment when you're doing business like that with China. So very, very nefarious, Tony. It's just absolutely diabolical.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that Larry Fink is on those boards. I knew that, but that should tell people everything they want to know. And here in New Zealand, you get this conspiracy theory about the World Economic Forum and so on. And yet, to kind of basically lambast anybody that has anything to say about it, and yet there we go. It's Larry Fink, and we've just had his company investing all this money, and he is right there on the World Economic Forum's board. So, I mean, it's all there in plain sight, and yet they're still trying to tell you, you're just a conspiracy theorist with a tinfoil hat if you think anything wrong with this stuff.
And it's funny that they use that kind of terminology. A conspiracy, by definition, requires secrecy. Right? I mean, if you look at a dictionary, the definition of a conspiracy is two or more people working in secret for illegal, immoral, unethical purposes. Right? And this does not meet the definition of conspiracy because they're doing it in the open, right? Certainly not a theory, because we can factually document all this. You can go to the World Economic Forum website and prove all of this. And set all theorizing aside, set all conspiracy aside, the World Economic Forum they signed a strategic partnership, and this is part of the public record. They signed a strategic partnership with the United Nations to implement UN Agenda 2030. Agenda 2030 is not a conspiracy theory. It's an international agreement signed onto by virtually every national government in the world, including New Zealand, including Barack Obama on behalf of the United States. Never ratified by our Congress, thankfully. Obama claimed it was an executive agreement that didn't need to be ratified, which is ludicrous from a legal perspective. But if you want to know what the World Economic Forum is doing without any kind of theories, go read Agenda 2030. They're a strategic partner in implementing it. They promise to bring the business community to the table, and all you got to do is read Agenda 2030. Goal number 10, we've got to redistribute the wealth of the world. We've got the same exact language that you heard every mass murdering communist thug of the last 100 years say right before they started slaughtering their fellow citizens and opening up gulags and torturing people. Right? We've seen this rhetoric before, and it's ironic because right after they approved Agenda 2030, the Communist Party of China came out through all of their propaganda organs, and they said, we played a crucial role in developing this Agenda 2030. You go to goal number 4, for example. The Agenda 2030 has 17, they call them sustainable development goals, with 169 targets beneath those. Goal number 4 is about brainwashing your children. And go read it, right? In very, very plain English. They say that all learners need to not just passively accept or submit to these crazy ideas about sustainable development, gender equality, human rights. They actually need to promote them. So the brainwashing has got to be stepped up another level. And when they say that these children have to start promoting sustainable development, you need to understand what sustainable development means using their own definitions, using their own documents. And we're talking about a total transformation of society, eradication of individual liberty, eradication of prosperity, the energy systems, the agricultural systems that make life possible. When they talk about human rights, they mean something radically different than we have traditionally understood in the Western world. Right? In the United States, as an example, our Declaration of Independence, when we declared independence from Britain, said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and they're endowed by God, by their creator, with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and of course property was among those as well. They got these ideas from the Bible. Of course, God said, thou shalt not murder, therefore you have a right to life. God said, thou shalt not steal, therefore you have a right to property. Then go look at the UN's own human rights documents, right? Pull up the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. One good place to start would be Article 29, where they tell you in very plain English, none of these rights and freedoms may ever be used contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Abominations. I mean, it's like saying, well, you have a right to speak freely, but if you're speaking against the UN, well, you can't do that. Okay, it's just an absolute fraud of human rights. And so when the UN says in Agenda 2030 that the World Economic Forum is helping to implement, that you have human rights, What they mean is you have no rights. So this is very, very dangerous. We could go on and on, but just to be clear here, there's no conspiracy. It's in the open. There's no theory. This is all factually documented. You can read it on their reports. And anybody who says it's a conspiracy theory is either completely ignorant and shouldn't be taken seriously, or they're lying to you. They're trying to gaslight you and get you to stop believing your own eyes. And at that point, you just say, well, anything else you have to say is completely discredited already. You've proven that you don't know what you're talking about, or you're dishonest.
Which is politicians the world over. And some of that has come from politicians. It's interesting. I'm looking, say, what's happening in America and New Zealand. Basically, it seems very much like communism to me in both cases. And so a friend of mine was saying to me this week, they were talking to someone and they said, oh, communism's good. And I was thinking, you've got to be joking. For those of us that remember what it was like with the Iron Curtain and all that, which side of the wall were people jumping to? And yet
it was an anti-fascist wall, Tony. It was to keep the fascists out, don't you know?
Yeah, I mean, the people just have a short memory, or else they've been brainwashed, particularly the younger ones, since that time. But, it's crazy that we're even having a generation that's embracing communistic type ideals when you look at the reality of lack of freedom under communism. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside, but yeah.
Can I comment on that real quick, Tony, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
So, communism really is a vein that runs through all of this. And if you listen to Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, who, of course, was recruited by Henry Kissinger, who was recruited by David Rockefeller, who was recruited by Satan, you got the clear chain of command there. He has given us a lot of details about the economic system that he wants. And it is very similar to what they have in communist China right now. Going back to Larry Fink for a moment, Larry Fink is also a member of a very shady organization known as the Trilateral Commission. So this was founded back in the 1970s based on a book that was written by a guy who would go on to become Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. His name was Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was a professor at an Ivy League university. Now, this book was called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Age. And what he argues is that America is now obsolete. This whole concept of God-given rights and limited government and rule of law, private property, individual freedom, that's got to go. No more. These are the next step forward, basically, in human evolution will be communism. He liked a lot of what the Soviet Union was doing, and he's pretty open about praising it. He did express some, differences of opinion here and there. But then he said the next step after that is what we're really going for, is this kind of technotronic, or what normal people would call a technocratic system. And it really is like a fusion of fascism and communism with an added twist. So rather than just overt central planning and total destruction of all private property rights, you can still keep a piece of private property as long as you're using the property for what your overlords demand. It's kind of like serfdom or neo-feudalism, if you will, where you can have your factory, just like in Klaus Schwab comes from a Nazi family. So in Nazi Germany, on paper, you could own a factory as long as your factory does what Der Fuhrer says. If your factory doesn't do what Der Fuhrer says, then you lose your factory, and so you never really owned it in the beginning. And so that's why it's not unusual, for example, to see Klaus Schwab with a bust in his office of Vladimir Lenin behind him. That's why it's not unusual for him to go over to communist China and just sound like he's in love with this mass murdering dictator Xi Jinping. He has actually said on communist Chinese propaganda television that the communist Chinese model is a role model for many countries. What? Massacring millions of people, re-education camps, concentration, gulags, chopping organs out of political prisoners, persecuting Christians, busting down churches and arresting pastors. That's a model for many countries. So these people are absolutely out of line. This is tyranny, undisguised tyranny, and it brings together the worst elements of communism, fascism, and technocracy in what I think is very clearly a satanic system. It takes all of the principles that God reveals in the Bible, flips them directly upside down, right? God says private property, thou shalt not steal. God says government is instituted. Why? Why did God ordain government? Well, to punish evil, to protect the good. And so they're taking all this and putting it upside down. Why should government exist? Well, to promote evil and to punish good people, right? So they're flipping it all upside down. It is as monstrous as can be. Forget the nice rhetoric about, it's going to be more efficient and we're going to save you from global warming. It's all baloney. This is about taking your freedom and ultimately your soul.
Yes, and how do the CBDCs fit into this? Because obviously, once they get that implemented, it's like game over for independence.
Yeah, and that's their plan. I mean, that is what they intend to do. So central bank digital currencies are a critical element of this control grid that they're building for a number of reasons. First of all, you completely eliminate all human privacy. Right now, I can take a $100 bill. I can go to the store. Nobody would know what I bought except me and the shopkeeper. That's a very nice system, if you ask me. Under a CBDC system, the government and the banks will know exactly who bought what, where, and when. They'll be able to feed all this data through the algorithms, through the artificial intelligence. They'll start making predictions about you. And if you listen to these World Economic Forum meetings, they're talking about this openly, Tony. They've got their own figures standing up in front of a World Economic Forum background saying, we're going to have programmable currency, and you're not going to be able to buy the things we don't want you to buy, and you've already exceeded your carbon footprint budget for the month, so you can't put gasoline in your car, you can't turn your air conditioning on. This is the most totalitarian economic control mechanism ever devised on a global scale like this. And people need to understand what they eventually hope to do is make it so that you cannot buy or sell, and if you've been reading your Bible, those words should sound familiar, that you cannot buy or sell if you don't do exactly what they say you need to do when they say you need to do it. So this is an effort to completely remove human freedom. This is an effort to do what they're doing in China right now, where they get the slaves to behave themselves without even having to use the terror apparatus, because you will behave yourself because you have no other option. If you buck the system, we'll cut off your money and you're done for, right? So people need to realize that's what's coming down the pike if we are not very careful here. And this is being rolled out all over the world. The Bank for International Settlements, which is coordinating this process, they just put out a report saying that more than 93% of all the national governments and central banks in the world are now in the process, somewhere on the line, right, ranging from has already deployed it in the Bahamas, the sand dollar, for example, to very close to deploying it. So almost every country in the world is now on track for these. The handful of scragglers will be brought along, kicking and screaming if necessary. So they're moving on this very, very rapidly. They don't want to tell people yet that they intend to abolish cash, but that process is already underway. It's been underway for well over a decade. And people, you better be paying attention because this is coming fast.
Yes, it certainly is not looking very good at all. So where does gold and silver, you mentioned them, where do they fit in with all of this? Because obviously central banks, a number of them have been accumulating it, gold and silver, at very advanced levels in the last few years. So they wouldn't be doing that for no reason. And at the same time, having the CBDCs being in the pipeline.
Yeah, a very good question, and it's interesting, as you say, that all these central banks are buying massive quantities of gold. Not the U.S., right? It actually seems to me, and I've spoken with several experts who have confirmed that something fishy is going on here. It seems to me like they are suppressing the price right now artificially to facilitate this massive transfer of gold out of the Western world, out of the Western economies, out of Europe, out of the United States, and ship that over to China, ship that over to Russia, ship that over to the BRICS countries, South Africa, India, etc. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but there have been numerous reports, including in state-funded media from some of these BRIC countries, that they are considering a gold-backed currency. And I do have an article coming out about gold very soon here, within the next couple of days at the latest. I interviewed several members of Congress about this. There's a bill in Congress right now to re-back the U.S. dollar by gold. The congressman who I interviewed about this to say, look, they're destroying the dollar. The government spending is totally out of control. They're basically looting the American people, right? With this paper money system, they can just wake up tomorrow and double the money supply. They just stole half of everybody's savings. I mean, you have basically given a blank check to the central banking cartel to take as much of your savings as they want whenever they want. So these congressmen said, no, that's not appropriate. We've got to restore the link between gold and the dollar so that they cannot do this anymore, so that they cannot spend and borrow trillions of dollars every year on illegal wars, killing babies, foreign aid to China, you name it. So that's interesting. At the state level, we have some interesting things going on as well. I interviewed some policymakers, lawmakers, senators, representatives in Texas who are now working. Texas 2015 passed a bill to create the Texas Gold Bullion Depository. At the time, I interviewed the individual responsible for that legislation, and he said, look, the country's going crazy. The economy's going crazy. We want to make sure that Texas at least has a plan B as things get weirder and weirder. So they set up this Texas Gold Bullion Depository. It is now operating. A citizen can go and deposit their gold there, and it can be stored in an account for them. So this new legislation, it didn't pass this year, but they're already getting ready to introduce it again for the next session in 2024, would create a system whereby people in Texas, and they hope to eventually expand this, but people in Texas could conduct business using their gold account at the depository. So you'd get a little card, whether it's a credit card, debit card, whatever. You'd go into a store. It would be just like using your normal credit card or debit card, but instead of paying in Federal Reserve notes to Visa or MasterCard or whatever it is, you would have a set amount of gold deducted from your gold account. So if I go in and buy a car, let's say my car costs $5,000. So they would deduct 2.5 ounces of gold from my account at the Gold Bullion Depository, transfer it over to the merchant. And so that legislation has already been written. It's underway. Representative Mark D'Orazio is the man responsible for it. I did a very extended interview with him. I spoke with legislators in other states who are now working to implement similar things in their own states. In fact, in the state of Utah, they say they're going to try to run a very similar bill to what they just had in Texas. They've got buy-in from people at the highest levels of state government. So really, really encouraging what's happening there. And then even in the private sector, one of the guys I interviewed, CEO of a company that's turning physical gold into like notes. And so you can get, they call them gold backs, I think, and you can get a note that's basically 1/1000th of an ounce of gold in this little note. You could put it in your wallet. You could carry it around. There's over 1,000 businesses now that will accept payment in these notes. So, a lot of different alternatives are popping up across the country. And, over and over again, as I'm interviewing these people who are working on these initiatives, the thought is always in their mind, like, hey, the dollar's in big trouble. The global economic system's in big trouble. The U.S. economy's in big trouble. We've got to have a plan B so that we can continue to do business with our friends, with our neighbors, with the people in our community, if and when everything else freezes up. And I think that's a wise idea.
Yeah, I don't know how that's going to work when they introduce CBDCs that are programmable and stuff. I'm not sure how that sort of system would work contrary to that. That's all.
Yeah, and there's a lot happening on that front too. My state of Florida, in fact, I worked with some of the legislators involved here. We just passed a law banning central bank digital currencies in the state of Florida. I met with a state senator just over the weekend who wants to introduce a similar bill in Iowa. Did a seminar for legislators in Ohio. They're thinking about running the same bill there. And what I've told them repeatedly is that this is like trying to put up a stick in the face of a raging river. One state, 2 states, 3 states banning CBDCs, it's not going to stop this flow. But if we get 20, 30 Republican states to say, we're not going to tolerate central bank digital currencies, we're not going to allow that to come into our state, that creates a very large market for alternative providers to come in and say, well, hey, we're going to offer something different. So I'm hoping we'll see more and more states move in this direction. Again, this is a very, very difficult process to stop. It's happening at the global level with some of the most powerful people and institutions on the planet. They've got the buy-in of a lot of the religious leaders of the world. In fact, I just gave a talk over the weekend on the weaponization of religion to bring the followers of these religions on board with this diabolical agenda. It's happening across the spectrum. Everybody now knows that Pope Francis is really active on this front, but a lot of Muslim leaders, Jewish leaders, Hindu leaders, even some quote-unquote evangelical leaders are jumping on the bandwagon here. You've got major Protestant leaders who are lending their name and basically selling out their congregations to this agenda. So all the big, powerful institutions are lined up against us, and it's us and God, I guess. So that'll be interesting.
Yes, yeah, well, and then, I'm thinking, well, once they introduce whatever the next pandemic is, that'll be probably the way they'll be able to get everybody compliant again to whatever system they go. We've got to go with now. You saw what happened under COVID and how basically the majority of people were sheep and followed along, and I can't see that really changing. They just got to introduce the right crisis when they're ready. But, it's kind of so many pieces of the puzzle coming together at once. There's one more thing I wanted to ask you about, and that was to do with the climate change agenda. And there was the case in Montana with a court case there, with some young people basically brought, crying, I suppose, about climate change. And, you'd know more about it than me probably about, how that went with the court siding with the climate activists.
Yeah, actually, I just wrote an article about that. It'll be published tomorrow at freedomproject.com. It's for my weekly education blog called the Newman Report. I encourage people to go read it. By the time you're watching this, it's probably be published already. Go to freedomproject.com. But this is a major case. Right? This is the first time a court in the United States has found that governments have an obligation to protect people's right to a safe climate. And so what they ruled was that the state agencies in Montana could not just be willy-nilly approving oil and gas exploration and permits without considering the impact on the climate. Now, this group that's behind this is called Our Children's Trust. They've filed similar lawsuits in every one of the 50 states. They've just been shopping around for some activist judge to put out a dumb ruling like this. I doubt it will survive on appeal. The Montana Attorney General's office put out a statement calling it absurd. He's a great state attorney general, Knudsen. I've interviewed him before for a number of articles, and he really is strong. They're going to be appealing this, of course, and I doubt it'll survive further up in the chain of appeals. But what it is a very significant public relations victory for these people. And actually the UN Environment Program, which incidentally is also trying to suck up the world's religions into this system. They have what they call the Faith for Earth Initiative, where they're trying to get all the religious leaders on board with the climate agenda. So they put out a statement saying that these climate lawsuits are building a body of law that they're going to then use to advance this agenda forward. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, the legal system does not actually support this. Just a few days ago, I interviewed the U.S. Assistant Attorney General during the Trump administration, who oversaw the whole Environment and Natural Resources Division of the Department of Justice. And what he says is that these people are torturing the statutes involved to try to get them to say what they want, but they don't say that, right? And so if and when we get to a legitimate court will look at that, they'll look at the law, and they'll say, no, this is ridiculous, throw it out. But that assumes, first of all, that we have a legitimate court somewhere with legitimate judges who are actually interested in reading what the text of the law says rather than what they want it to say. But, people need to understand how they're weaponizing children here, too. I just was at the UN Climate Summit. Actually, I came on your program shortly after that, the one they did in Egypt. And that was the first one ever where they had a whole youth delegation, a whole youth pavilion. And I interviewed some of these kids, and it almost made you want to cry, Tony, because they were totally clueless. They didn't know anything about the science. They were parroting the talking points that they were given. And as soon as you confront them with a question that they didn't have prepared talking points for, it was, we all know climate change is bad, and don't be a denier. Totally ludicrous. But they're weaponizing our children. Now, we just had a poll come out here in the United States just a few months ago, and again, it confirmed what we already knew. Most Americans do not believe the man-made global warming hypothesis, and it's very simple to replicate these results, because what the fake media does is they say, "Are you concerned about climate change?" And more than half of people say yes, and they say, "Look, most Americans care about climate change." Very, very deceitful. So the way this new Gallup poll that came out a few months ago did it, they said, are you concerned about global warming, yes or no? And most people said yes. Then they broke that, the group that said yes, they broke it down further. Do you think human activities are primarily responsible for this? And once you do that, what you find is it's only a minority of American adults who actually believe the man-made global warming hypothesis. And so they're going for the children. All over the United States, even in my state of Florida, where people think that our governor and our state legislature has fixed our schools. No, they haven't. They are brainwashing children to believe that the gas they exhale is a dangerous, toxic pollution. It's a lie from the pit of hell, but little kids don't know better, right? And parents don't realize that their kids are being indoctrinated with this. So that's their strategy: lawfare and brainwashing children. And they very much hope that that's going to be enough, that as the older Americans, as the older people in advanced countries die off, the people who knew better, go on to the next life, and the younger generations come up and take their positions as judges, as politicians, as CEOs, et cetera, then they're going to be able to make this transition. Extremely, extremely dangerous.
It is. And then we've just got to get them to agree to chop down all the old trees because they're not stopping carbon producing. They could cause fires, so they need to be chopped down, or they're inefficient. So we need to chop down all the old forests as well.
Yep.
It's just crazy, all of this, the lengths that they're going to with this brainwashing. And I mean, you saw it with Greta Thunberg, a few years ago. That sort of set a precedent for, you could see just how crazy the whole thing is with the climate indoctrination. It's got far worse since she started.
Yeah, and they still lift Greta Thunberg up as a role model for young people. I actually just got back from Sweden very recently, and you talk to any little Swedish kid, and Greta's like their idol. Oh, I want to be like Greta, right? Because she's famous, and she gets to go confront world leaders, and she gets to save the world. Millions, hundreds of millions of kids all over the world think, well, that's what I want to be. I want to be an influencer, and it's very sad. Kids used to want to be great artists. They used to want to be, great businessmen. They used to want to be, police. Now they want to be influencers to stop global warming. And, they figure if I can be half naked on Instagram, more people will follow me. And it actually was funny at the Egypt Climate Summit. They kind of threw Greta Thunberg overboard for a little while because she was calling it a farce. So they brought on this new girl. I forget her name now, but the UN really started promoting her heavily. She was the new youth advisor to Secretary General Antonio Guterres. And I went over to her social media accounts, and it's all her, half naked, showing off her body, dressed totally immodestly. So this is what they're doing to our kids. They're sexualizing, they're dumbing down, and they're brainwashing our kids, ultimately to use them as a weapon against Christianity, against our churches, against our communities, our families, and our countries. I can't tell parents in stronger terms, you have got to protect your children. If you don't disciple them, the world will, and that's not going to work out well for anyone.
So to close up, maybe you could tell people where they find you online, and also just any closing thoughts about maybe what we should do as individuals at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I would say the very first thing that we should be doing as individuals is what God tells us to do, and that is to be constantly in prayer. We should be constantly thanking God, and we should be constantly asking Him for help and for guidance and for wisdom and for discernment and for humility. We're surrounded in an ocean of lies, and without divine assistance, without help from the Holy Spirit to discern what is true, to discern what is not true, we are going to be deceived. We've got to rely on God to help us. Now, we have His Word, and we have the Holy Spirit as Christians to help guide us into all truth, and we need that now more than ever before. So, folks, before you do anything else, drop down onto your knees and pray, and just beg God to help guide you through these outrageous times that we find ourselves in. And on every issue, you should be seeking His counsel, and that begins in His Word, and it begins in prayer. God, what would you have me do about my business? What would you have me do about my children? What would you have me do about where I live? And on every question, you need to be consulting God, and you need to be consulting the Scriptures. Other things to do, get active. Maybe that's getting active in your church. Maybe that's volunteering for some ministry. You're not the only one who's confused, right? The world is going to hell in a handbasket, and there's a lot of people that are hurting. There's a lot of people that are bewildered by what's going on, and the church should be out there preaching the gospel, making disciples, and helping to clarify these things for people. We have the Word of God, the revealed Word of God, and other people need it desperately. So we should be out there. One way to do that is to volunteer within your church and to get involved there. I do believe people should be active in every realm of society. So, it's not enough to just go vote anymore, especially in Western countries where, in theory, the people are sovereign, the people are supposed to be making decisions. When you live in a country like the United States, where we the people are the government, I mean, that's the very first words in our Constitution. We the people are supposed to be the government. How is it that we can tolerate the mass murder of babies? How is it that we can tolerate total lawlessness? How is it that we can tolerate, in Canada right now, they're going after, Pastor Artur Pawlowski. They want to put him in jail for 10 years. How is it that we, in countries that supposedly have a very strong majority of self-proclaimed Christians, how is it that we can be tolerating these things in government? It's because we have not been as active as we should be. God is the author of civil government, and I do believe that Christians have an obligation to be involved. Not all of us. That doesn't mean everybody needs to go out and run for office or even obsess about politics. Our hope is not in this world, of course. But while we are here, we are meant to be salt and light. We are meant to influence the culture. We are meant to be a light. And in case you haven't noticed, the world is getting really dark really fast. We need to shine bright as much as we possibly can. People can find my stuff. The main hub is libertysentinel.org. People can sign up for my weekly Substack there. I try to give people a roundup of the key things that are happening. It's free unless you want to support that way. But just go to libertysentinel.org. You can put your email address in. And then, I'm on Twitter, AlexNewman_JOU. And then my writings you can find all over the place. The article we did on BlackRock, that's at thenewamerican.com. The articles I mentioned about the gold and currencies and also the U.S. dollar losing its status as a global reserve, you'll find those at the Epoch Times. The one I mentioned about the climate litigation that just happened, that'll be published tomorrow at freedomproject.com. And that's a handful of the places that I'm putting stuff. And thank you so much, Tony, for having me on the program. It's always an honor to be with you, and I so appreciate all that you're doing.
And I appreciate you coming on, Alex, and it's always action-packed and so much information. So thank you so much for once again coming on the Minute to Midnight Show.
Thank you, sir. God bless you.
God bless you too. And folks, don't forget our website is minute2midnight.com with midnight spelled MIDNITE. Please make sure you're subscribed to us there, and also our Rumble, BitChute, Apple Podcasts and YouTube channels. Currently on suspension on YouTube for posting for a couple of weeks, but by the time this is out, it shouldn't be too far away from expired, so I'll be able to post things again on YouTube. But just realize that they do ban a lot of the Minute to Midnight stuff on YouTube, so that's why we want you to subscribe to us at our other outlets. And A Minute to Midnight is run 100% by donations. If you're able to help, that's always much appreciated. A big thank you to the people that do donate, and you can do that at aminutetomidnight.com if you want to help us out. And the music used, I've written, played and recorded. So that's it for this episode. God bless, stay safe, and God willing, we'll be back in a few days with another episode of the A Minute to Midnight Show.